Working by touch, he pulled the little pegs from their bag and planted them in rows, carefully laying the leather strings in their forked tops. The ends of the strings were fastened to delicately balanced steel bells that tinkled at the slightest touch. Thus protected, he lay down in the center of his warning spider web and spent a restless night, half awake, waiting tensely for the bells to ring. In the morning the march continued, and they came to the barrier cairn, and when the slaves stopped, Jason urged them past it. They did this happily, looking forward to witnessing a good fight for possession of the violated territory. Their hopes were justified when later in the day the other row of slaves was seen far off to the right, and a figure detached itself and ran toward them. "Hate you, Ch'aka!" Fasimba shouted as he ran up, only this time he meant what he said. "Coming on my ground, I kill you!" "Not yet," Jason called out, "and hate you, Fasimba. Sorry, I forgot the formalities. I don't want any of your land, and the old treaty, or whatever it is, still holds. I just want to talk to you." Fasimba stopped, but kept his stone hammer ready, very suspicious. "You got new voice, Ch'aka." "I got new Ch'aka. Old Ch'aka now pushing up the daisies. I want to trade back a slave from you, and then we'll go." "Ch'aka fight hard. You must be good fighter, Ch'aka." He shook his hammer angrily. "Not as good as me, Ch'aka." "You're the tops, Fasimba. 9 slaves out of 10 want you for a master. Look, can't we get to the point? Then I'll get my mob out of here." He looked at the row of approaching slaves, trying to pick out Mikah. "I want back the slave who had the hole in his head. I'll give you 2 slaves in trade. Your choice. What do you say to that?" "Good trade, Ch'aka. You pick one of mine. Take the best. I'll take 2 of yours, but hole in head gone. Too much trouble. Talk all the time. I got sore foot from kicking him. Got rid of him." "Did you kill him?" "Don't waste slaves. Traded him to the D'zertanoj. Got arrows. You want arrows?" "Not this time, Fasimba, but thanks for the information." He rooted around in a pouch and pulled out a krenoj. "Here, have something to eat." "Where you get poisoned krenoj?" Fasimba asked with interest. "I could use a poisoned krenoj." "This isn't poisoned. It's perfectly edible, or at least as edible as these things ever are." Fasimba laughed. "You pretty funny, Ch'aka. I give you 1 arrow for poisoned krenoj." "You're on," Jason said, throwing the krenoj to the ground between them. "But I tell you it's perfectly good." "That's what I tell man I give it to. I got good use for a poisoned krenoj." He threw an arrow into the sand away from them and grabbed up the vegetable as he left. When Jason picked up the arrow it bent, and he saw that it was rusted almost completely in 2 and that the break had been craftily covered by clay. "That's all right," he called after the retreating slaver. "Just wait until your friend eats the krenoj." The march continued, first back to the boundary cairn with the suspicious Fasimba dogging their steps. Only after Jason and his band had passed the border did the others return to their normal foraging. They began the long walk to the borders of the inland desert. Since they had to search for krenoj as they went, it took them the better part of 3 days to reach their destination. Jason merely started the line in the correct direction, but as soon as he was out of sight of the sea, he had only a rough idea of the correct course. However, he did not confide his ignorance to the slaves, and they marched steadily on, along what was obviously a well-known route to them. Along the way they collected and consumed a good number of krenoj, found 2 wells from which they refilled the skin bags, and pointed out a huddled animal sitting by a hole that Jason, to their unvoiced disgust, managed to miss completely with a bolt from the crossbow. On the morning of the 3rd day, Jason saw a line of demarcation on the flattened horizon, and before the midday meal they came to a sea of billowing bluish-gray sand. The ending of what he had been accustomed to thinking of as the desert was startling. Beneath their feet were yellow sand and gravel, while occasional shrubs managed a sickly existence, as did some grass and the life-giving krenoj. Animals as well as men lived here, and ruthless though survival was, they were at least alive. In the wastes ahead no life was possible or visible, though there seemed to be no doubt that the D'zertanoj lived there. This must mean that though it looked unlimited, as Ijale believed it to be, there were probably arable lands on the other side. Mountains as well, if they weren't just clouds, since a line of gray peaks could just be made out on the distant horizon. "Where do we find the D'zertanoj?" he asked the nearest slave, who merely scowled and looked away. Jason was having a problem with discipline. The slaves would not do a thing he asked unless he kicked them. Their conditioning had been so thorough that an order unaccompanied by a kick just wasn't an order, and his continued reluctance to impose the physical coercion with the spoken command was just being taken as a sign of weakness. Already some of the burlier slaves were licking their lips and sizing him up. His efforts to improve the life of the slaves were being blocked completely by the slaves themselves. With a mumbled curse at the obduracy of the human race, Jason sank the toe of his boot into the man. "Find them there by Big Rock," was the immediate response. There was a dark spot at the desert's edge in the indicated direction, and when they approached, Jason saw that it was an outcropping of rock that had been built up with a wall of bricks or boulders to a uniform height. A good number of men could be concealed behind that wall, and he was not going to risk his precious slaves or even more precious skin anywhere near it. At his shout the line halted and settled to the sand, while he stalked a few meters in front, settling his club in his hand, and suspiciously examined the structure. That there were unseen watchers was proven when a man appeared from around the corner and walked slowly towards Jason. He was dressed in loose-fitting robes and carried a basket on one arm, and when he had reached a point roughly halfway between Jason and the rock he had just quitted, he halted and sat cross-legged in the sand, the basket at his side. Jason looked carefully in all directions and decided the position was safe enough. There were no places of concealment where armed men might have hidden, and he had no fear of the single man. Club ready, he walked out and stopped a full 3 paces from the other. "Welcome, Ch'aka," the man said. "I was afraid we wouldn't be seeing you again after that little difficulty we had." He remained seated while he talked, stroking the few strands of his scraggly beard. His head was shaven smooth and as sunburned and leathery brown as the rest of his face, the most prominent feature of which was the magnificent prow of a nose that terminated in flaring nostrils and was used as sturdy support for a pair of handmade sunglasses. They appeared to be carved completely of bone and fit tightly to the face. Their flat, solid fronts were cut with thin, transverse slashes. This eye protection, the things could only have been for weak eyes, and the network of wrinkles indicated the man was quite old and would present no danger to Jason. "I want something," Jason said in straightforward, Ch'akish manner. "A new voice and a new Ch'aka. I bid you welcome. The old one was a dog, and I hope he died in great pain when you killed him. Now sit, friend Ch'aka, and drink with me." He carefully opened the basket and removed a stone crock and 2 crockery mugs. "Where you get poison drink?" Jason asked, remembering his local manners. The D'zertano was a smart one and had been able to tell instantly from Jason's voice that there had been a change in slaves. "And what is your name?" "Edipon," the ancient said, as, uninsulted, he put the drinking apparatus back into the basket. "What is it that you want? Within reason, that is. We always need slaves, and we are willing to trade." "I want slave you got. I trade you 2 for 1." The seated man smiled coldly from beneath the shelter of his nose. "It is not necessary to talk as ungrammatically as the coastal barbarians, since I can tell by your accent that you are a man of education. What slave is it that you want?" "The one that you just received from Fasimba. He belongs to me." Jason abandoned his linguistic ruse and put himself even more on guard, taking a quick look around at the empty sands. This dried up old bird was a lot brighter than he looked, and he would have to stay on guard. "Is that all you want?" Edipon asked. "All I can think of at this moment. You produce this slave, and perhaps we can talk more business." "I have an even better idea than that." Edipon's laugh had very dirty overtones, and Jason sprang back when the oldster put 2 fingers into his mouth and whistled shrilly between them. There was the rustle of shifting sand, and Jason wheeled to see the men apparently climbing out of the empty desert, pushing back wooden covers over which the sand had been smoothed. There were 6 of them, with shields and clubs, and Jason cursed his stupidity at meeting